Back within the days of 8-bit magics, or rather 8-bit graphics, the way to effectively communicate your art style of a game wasn't through the actual graphics. Not entirely. Rather, it was the culmination of two things. One, the imagination of the player, and the art from the booklet or manual that came with the game. With the limitations of 8-bit graphical power of the time, the art that came with the game became our guide, our portal to imagining what was originally visually intended by the developers. This was the magic of the daring art that encouraged us to dream of worlds filled with terrifying enemies, labyrinths, and ancient dragons, worlds filled with adventure, and the threat of the unknown looming around every single corner. After all, how could this be scary unless we had been prepared to look at it as this? How could this be appealing without this precursor? How could the adventure ever take place? How would we know what the adventure was even supposed to be without the guidance of the art packaged along with the game? Simply, we wouldn't. That's the true magic of the power of imagination that was harnessed during these 8-bit times. I remember growing up in the 90s, playing my father's NES. Particularly, my favorite game was The Legend of Zelda, and every time before I played that game, I would pore over the manual and look at the fantastic depictions of the enemy characters and the art that set the tone of the adventure that I was about to begin. That being said, without further ado, let us examine the art of The Legend of Zelda. First, we are greeted by a 2-page spread that serves as both a painted map of Hyrule and the prologue to the story. Next is the call to action, where our journey starts, hearing the plea of an old woman. You might be thinking, well, this is an uninteresting image and an uninteresting way to start the story. Not much going on. We're not introduced to any dynamic art. It's rather simple here, and there's nothing that really grabs the attention of the viewer. Spare Impa's concerned expression. We aren't really treated to anything expansive here, or that would get us excited, but suddenly, as we turn the page, we see a quick transition from lush green forestry that seems the standard to a raging crimson sky, undefined steep mountains, even a river that seems to reflect the animosity of the sky above, thick, dense forestry that looks suffocating. This landscape looks unforgiving and absolutely dangerous. Our hero steps forward into that land of danger with sword in hand. This particular piece of art, to me, is the heart of the game. It's the most important aspect being highlighted as the young, daring hero courageously enters into the unfamiliar. In this case, it's the land itself that is trepidatious. The land itself is the enemy that is to be faced. Even his encounter with another Hylian seems incredibly tense. Notice how the shopkeeper keeps his eyes squarely on Link, not even looking down to count the rupees in his hands. Even with the more cartoony style of the characters, it doesn't seem to detract away from the seriousness that's being conveyed through the art. Personally, I adore it. Once again, we turn the page, and we are treated to some fantastic moments of the adventure, frozen in time for our viewing. The art of these 2 pages serve as such an amazing story arc conveyed. Yet, not all is Stygian and without hope. Absolutely, my second favorite of the art depicted in this manual has to be the meeting with the fairy. Contrary to the cruel-looking landscape that we have been introduced in the former, there is indeed help and aid to be found within the desolate land of Hyrule, much to the awe of Link and ourselves. Not everything exists to end the young adventurer, but some exist to extend the hand of aid in moments most dire, and that can mean everything on a journey. The scene is painted for us. Perhaps Link knelt down to gather water, and suddenly, He realized the waters itself were the domain of a fairy, only to receive the righteous blessing of a being said to only come to those sacred of heart. This theme will come into play later. And we arrive here at the entrance of a formidable and imposing-looking dungeon, the Maw of the Beast itself, carved into stone, no less. We arrive at the point where daring and boastful attitude are not enough. What is required to continue is courage to proceed into the lair of the unknown. This marks the first true challenge. Depicted in the art, this is the belly of the beast. Such a presence this gateway has. Our hero looks immensely small in comparison. Fear is conveyed through the curves of this piece. After all, without fear there can be no courage. The only question remains is if he will proceed or turn back. In the next piece, we see the choice made. The solid story told without words is clear. The choice to continue into the unknown and engage dangerous forces. We see by the movement lines that this was a bold rush and a successful attack. And to reach the finality of this two-page view, we have the result of the choice made, the desperate struggle with the Lamb Nola. Action lines reach to the outskirts of the piece. Link stands ready to strike with sword and shield in hand. A foe easily 30 times larger than himself looms as it peeks its head around the corner. The intensity is visible, the tenacity outspoken. Did Link run behind this pillar to launch a desperate attack? Perhaps it is a surprise attack, and the Lamb Nola does not know of his whereabouts. Perhaps Link ran away, and this is the dead-end corner that he has been caught in. It doesn't matter, because in this moment, it isn't about what has created the situation, it is more so the desperate struggle happening. Does Link survive this encounter? Well, it ends perfectly, so much so that we must turn the page to know what happens next. The fact that he lives means he must have defeated it. We see him avoiding an unnecessary fight by traveling through a passage. It may look like a throwaway scene, but it is clear the Dark Nut won't be able to fit in the small passage. Perhaps using the environment was one of the treasures withdrawn from the last desperate struggle had. Next is the first of the final trilogy of pieces that end the story and bring closure. Now, we may see many events happening all at once. At first glance, it seems that our hero is jumping to avoid some powerful enemy, but rather, upon closer inspection, it would be that the room itself was being destroyed. Some great enemy arose, destroying the integrity of the room, and our hero jumped into another that wasn't falling apart. We see the former room was well lit, as the current room is dark. As to why that is, the next piece answers many riddles introduced by this scene. We arrive at the halfway point, the final confrontation. I never used to like this piece, but upon further inspection, it would seem all too important. The same face we saw only moments ago revealed to be a real titan of a foe, the largest by far. And this is the first time that an enemy has been depicted in more than one piece. It's a good bet that this is the Prince of Darkness we have heard about. Yet, we are only treated to seeing the back of a calf. The rest is communicated by its unnatural shadow and its imposing ability to lead a room to ruin. This allows us to fill in the blanks with our imagination. This placement is fantastic as well. To face a foe so grand that one must climb to meet them, this is the material of legend. What comes next could only be made properly in our imagination, the final battle. Now, The finality comes with this beautiful shot. The killing blow is obvious, yet at first glance, it would seem our hero is defeating the evil that is besetting the land, the symbolic representation of the crimson sky and the land itself. However, I would submit that this is more along the lines of purification of evil from the land entirely. Reaching between the very land itself and the sky, our hero stands as the proxy between heaven and earth, purifying both realms. The completed Triforce within his grasp is raised into the heart of darkness, or rather, the Inferno, and the halo is created, an indication of the sacrosanct nature of the quest that has been completed. As we look into the monstrous Inferno, we can see that it's almost breaking apart. The face no longer smiles with fangs. Rather, it looks as if it is screaming. The final blow has been delivered. The end of the quest. Courage has conquered fear. If we were to turn the page, I imagine that the sky is returned to the crisp azure it had been so long absent from. The rivers would be a clean dark blue, and the trees would return to a lush emerald. However, sadly, this page marks the end of the fully drawn depictions. The story ends here. The following becomes a bit of a reference guide to the items in the game, as well the glorious painted depictions of the enemies. But before we get into that, it's an interesting note that the items pertaining to Link are drawn in less than a detailed style. Even Link himself receives the same treatment. Perhaps these were an afterthought, or perhaps an intended aspect of the story being given to us. Perhaps the depiction of the enemies and items were from the point of view of a boy. Perhaps the viewing perspective is that of a child, a memory of a time when he entered a land poised at his own destruction. And this simple depiction is how he perceives himself at that time, and as well the items he used. Rather, his true focus was entirely on the threats that stood in front of him, now forever burned into his memory. But before we get into the enemy depictions, I want to talk about the themes conveyed through each of the pieces. First, the call to action. Next, the introduction of the odds, the challenge. Next, the introduction of the required mentality. The surprise of hope. The point of no return. The successful battle, and the dawn of the desperate struggle. The knowledge gained. The revealed enemy. The final confrontation. The killing blow and the purification of the land. It's a fantastic story told through some truly fantastic art and the imagination. A story of courage conquering fear. A tale of saving a land from the grips of malignancy. A legend not so easily forgotten. Now, onto the fantastic enemy art.